Hello, I'm Trudi Rainsberry, and today I'm going to talk to you about special or intense interests in our children and young people on the autism spectrum, how we can celebrate and use these to support our children, and when necessary, how we might consider refocusing and shifting or building attention. The children we support have a different thinking style to non-autistic children, with intense interest or hyperfocus being a key defining feature of being on the autism spectrum. And this intense interest or hyperfocus might be on a particular topic, such as animals, trains, television programs, computer games, boy bands, music, or it could be in a particular action, such as repetitive movements, which might be described as being stimming type behaviour, or seeking a particular sensory input. This can also sometimes be termed as being monotropic. That means being engrossed in something to the exclusion of everything else going on around you. And sometimes this could be known as being in a state of flow. And being in a state of flow has actually been linked to happiness and well-being in individuals on the autism spectrum. Hyperfocusing may also link to sensory processing differences, and this may be due to hypersensitivity in receiving too much sensory input, and so the young person focuses on one particular sensory channel. It could be that a difference in central coherence, where a young person is able to see great detail in their environment but finds it difficult to see the bigger picture. Now, this can be a really positive strength and skill in our children and young people on the autism spectrum. However, sometimes it can cause difficulties if there's a hyper-focus on the particular objects in the environment. And I've experienced where children and young people might become extremely dysregulated and upset if a particular object's been moved in their environment. And as I've said in a previous video, it can also be things like taking a different route to school, and they've got a particular interest in that sameness of that route. Special or intense interests can not only help our children and young people's mental health and well-being, they can provide fantastic motivators and goals, providing opportunities for really meaningful differentiation and positive feedback. However, there can be negative aspects when requiring our children to shift or share their attention in learning activities, or perhaps a young person wants to engage in a particular social activity, and this is something that might be preventing them from doing so. And in some instances, it can sometimes be dangerous. I remember listening to Ros Blackburn speaking about her intense interest in going trampolining. However, she had very poor road safety awareness, and her desire and drive to go trampolining actually meant she was a risk to herself when crossing the road, and she needed adult support to do this. Many people use the term special interest. However, other people might use the term obsessed or obsessional behaviour. And if you're the individual, then that's your choice. However, I once listened to John Simpson talking about his view on the difference between special interests and obsessional behaviour. And in his view, he was quite clear in saying that special interests were something that were positive and could act as a motivator or provide goals, whereas obsessions were something that he might be compelled to do, even though it's something that he found negative. And this has lasted with me for many years, and I think it's really important to think about whether something is a particularly special interest or intense interest that's positive and can support our children, or whether it's something that is negative and a compulsion that is due to something such as distress and might actually be harmful to their physical or mental well-being. How can we support our children and young people on the autism spectrum using their intense or special interests? And it can be challenging because we do need to think about whether the intense interest is something that is positive, or sometimes it might be an indication of increased stress and anxiety, particularly if some repetitive behaviours are becoming more intense and the child or young person doesn't appear to be enjoying them. And to do this, we need to think about watching for why, writing it down and talking it through to have that proactive approach about how we might embrace those particular interests. And I've heard so many times in so many different ways about parents or adults that are supporting children and young people describing how the child might engage in some stimming behaviours, and they may say, oh, they're jumping up and down and they're starting to flap, and now they're getting older, it's really obvious and people are starting to stare at them or even record it on their telephone. Well, that is a matter of trying to support those people around them to understand what autism means to that individual. An example of this is when I was working in an amazing mainstream school and they were rehearsing for a particular assembly, and one of the children who's on the autism spectrum was really enjoying it, and they were jumping up and down and they were singing really loudly and flapping their arms, and the adult supporting them was noticeably stressed and trying to quiet them down and prevent them from flapping in a very gentle way. And when I went over to talk to them about it, they said they were really anxious about what that child's parents would think, what the other parents would think, and even what other members of staff would think. And it was one of those situations where it was really about explaining autism and embracing that difference and thinking creatively about how it might be supported in an inclusive way. And that could be having other children standing next to them and all of the children either engaging in some free dance or having some streamers or pom-poms that they might be able to wave, so that it's inclusive and it's seen to be okay to do. But obviously explaining and educating in those situations are really important. In a recent GAP, Good Autism Practice journal article, a specialist TA called Lydia Davey had done a piece of research on how mapping and using special interests across the curriculum could be used to support and motivate children and young people on the autism spectrum, looking at the interests and activities under the headings physical, calming and sensory. And when we are thinking about using special or intense interests to differentiate, we could use it in areas such as shifting attention or transitions, and this has actually been covered in the last video that we did. When we think about using those interests with things such as now and next boards, which I've shown you before, where we've got the Green Lantern, Batman and a football club, to say now we are going to do reading, next we're going to play with the dinosaurs, because that person might have an interest in using that as a goal, so they want to play or engage with their dinosaur activity. And also thinking about if a child's finding it difficult to transition from a particular area around the school, it may be listening to particular music on the headphones. If it's an older young person who's got a particular interest in music, we see many children using devices to transition to school due to the high levels of stress, because sometimes occur when in transport, because it's obviously a different environment. And also it could be as simple as having particular cartoon characters along a wall so that the child is able to go along and either collect them or tick them off on a particular board that they might be using. So that might help with those transitions. Also thinking about topic work and English, if a child's got an interest in such as Lego or Playmobil, to actually role play the different activity or part of a story that they're meant to understand, to engage them and get them thinking and talking about that particular area. Also in maths, there's a lot of areas of interest that some young people might have. It may be in number work, it may be in particular patterns and shape, and so that sort of repetitive patterns or tessellation might be of interest to them. And it could be in geography or DT, where young person's expected to design or map a particular area, and thinking about maybe they've got an interest in a computer game world that they could use, or a theme park. I used to know a young person who wanted to be a Disney Imagineer and they liked designing theme parks. And also for social activities, and this can be really crucial with making those social clubs and activities available for our young people. And it may be such as a Comic-Con club where children can go along, or young people go along, and think about cosplay costumes that they want to design, culminating with a trip to Comic-Con at the end of it. And although it is challenging for our young people to generalise these skills with special interests at times, it can lead to successful careers and working as adults, so that their quality of life is really enhanced. And I know people who are in the music or computer tech industry or are engineers, and so we do need to think about the importance of these intense interests. Difficulties can arise due to negative and intrusive fixed activities or obsessions, and this might prevent the child or young person from engaging in things that they really need to do for their own benefit and health or learning. And so it may be that we explore whether there are any anxieties that are causing them to engage in this particular activity or interest, and also think about whether there are any anxieties relating to the expectations that we are placing on them, thinking about whether or not we can link to their interests in a way that is appropriate, if it is a really inappropriate or dangerous activity, and also thinking about whether we can offer an element of control, having a DERM approach. Does it really matter when we place expectations on our children and young people? Also, repetitive questioning can be something that is exhausting for the child themselves or for the adults that are supporting them. And again, it's thinking about whether or not this questioning is being done due to high levels of anxieties, or whether it's a checking in point for them because they are unaware of when and where something's going to happen. So thinking about whether we can offer a particular object that they might have in their pocket that can relate to that interest, where they can know if they touch that, that will remind them that something is going to happen and they're reassured by that. Or it could be through the use of visuals or a social story to explain that. And it may be a timetable, as we've talked about previously, that could support them in this way. Sometimes our children and young people might be compelled to engage in routines and rituals that are extremely negative and can be physically harmful. And this might be things such as nail picking, head banging, or biting themselves, or pica, where they eat inedible objects. And we need to explore and think about what the purpose of these rituals and routines are. And it may be communicating pain or extreme stress and anxiety. It could be sensory seeking and getting that sensory feedback. And so we can then think of what we can offer as a similar but alternative input to support them with an alternative routine. And this might be with Pika offering edible or chewable objects that such as chew chums, ice cubes, or carrots as an alternative, and it might be engaging in trampolining and physical activities to reduce that stress. Fixed and extreme negative thoughts and feelings can also be extremely distressing for the young person, as well as challenging for the adults supporting them. And it's really important in these instances that professional advice is sought. And this may start at the GP, but it would be important to go through the mental health pathways on offer to you, and that would be beneficial to engage all adults supporting the young person and child, whether that's in the home and the learning environment too. And it's important for us to try to communicate and connect with our children in those instances, making sure that we listen and acknowledge their feelings without judging them. Attention, focus and engaging with a particular person or a given activity can be extremely challenging for our children and young people on the autism spectrum. And I'd ask you to refer back to videos on communication and connection, because it's really important that we think about making that connection through being genuinely interested and being creative to support them. And we might do this through intensive interaction, through mirroring behaviours, through sensory activities such as water play, where we're hiding objects of interest in the bottom of some water beads to get them to explore and investigate things that they're going to find motivating. It could be through tac-pack, music connections, or building attention autism approaches into the learning environment, and that can go through different varying stages of independence, and I'll put the links to those at the bottom. But always remembering with all interventions or resources that we're using that we need to be sensitive to whether or not our children are becoming overwhelmed or stressed, and we don't want them to be forced to engage in particular activities if they find it stressful. Parallel play or parallel activities where we engage in the same activity alongside our children can actually build that genuine and natural reciprocal interaction, gaining our children's curiosity in what we are doing, and also offering opportunities for generalizing different skills. Next week, I'm going to be talking about emotional regulation, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.